Hello everyone, and welcome to Memory, brought to you by UCLA InterAxon. Today, we are going to talk about memory, what it is, the different types of memory, how memory affects us, and how we affect our own memories. So, what exactly is memory? Officially, it's defined as the means by which we retain and draw on our past experiences to use information in the present. In other words, memory is what makes us who we are. The things we experience can help us learn and prevent making avoidable mistakes. What's the earliest experience you can remember in your life? Can you name something you did yesterday? These are all examples of your memory at work. All of this helps to inform our decisions and how we live our lives. For example, if you trip on a bump in the sidewalk, you'll learn to be more careful when you see a similar obstacle in the future. When you remember something, does the memory change over time? It actually does. An important aspect of memory is that it's reconstructive, which means it can be rebuilt or remade. That's because the pathways used to recall that memory are influenced by outside factors, like how it interacts with other memories. For example, some memories can be mixed together and confused with other experiences. There are three main parts of memory and one related system: encoding, storage, retrieval, and forgetting. Encoding is creating a memory from experience and using the information that is represented by that memory. Storage is holding on to and maintaining the information in the brain so it can be remembered for later. Retrieval is pulling out the information from the memory so it can be used at a later time. A concept tied to memory is forgetting. When the neurons associated with a memory start to weaken, they are replaced by newer and stronger neurons. However, if a particular memory hasn't been retrieved for quite some time, the neuron associated with it could start to degrade. Think about what you had for breakfast yesterday. You probably were able to answer after a few moments. Now, try thinking about what you had for breakfast exactly a year ago. Most likely, you won't be able to recall that memory because it is no longer stored. An easy way to think of the parts of memory is we make it, store it, take it out of storage for use, and sometimes throw it away when we don't need it, which is forgetting. There are also three main types of memory: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. We'll explain what each of those are and how they're different. Sensory memory is the first stage of memory, where information is taken in through hearing, sight, touch, and other senses. Iconic memory is visual sensory memory, and echoic is sound sensory memory. It is very brief, only lasting for a few seconds. For example, if you are concentrating on doing your homework while your parents are talking around you, you might be aware that they're talking, but you don't actually know what they're talking about since you weren't actively focusing on it. Sensory memories only get stored if you are paying attention to the sensation. Do you know what short-term memory is? If you've ever played a memory game where you try to remember a list of words and then recite that list, you're using your short-term memory. Short-term memory is capable of holding information for short periods of time until you either forget it or it is moved to long-term storage memory by thinking about the list often. We call this rehearsing information. Short-term memory can actually be improved to be able to hold more information, such as by doodling, as it reportedly helps one focus, understand new topics, and remember information. Most people who haven't practiced lengthening their short-term memory can usually memorize around 7 items on a list before skipping or forgetting things. This is why most phone numbers, excluding the area code, are 7 digits long, for easy memorization. Try this for yourself. Start thinking of one number and randomly add numbers to the list. Each time you add a new number, repeat the whole list from scratch to see how far you can get. Was it around 7?
Long-term memory. If short-term memory is for remembering information for a short period of time, what do you think long-term memory is for? Long-term memory is how we remember information for long periods of time, possibly forever. It has a large storage capacity But to encode information, it takes active attention and effort. There are a few different techniques that people use for long-term memory storage. These usually involve different devices like mnemonics, which are short words or phrases that stand for something else. If you've studied the order of operations in math, you are probably familiar with the mnemonic, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally," or PEMDAS. Remembering these short phrases can help store the information for later, when you need to get it back. There are different types of long-term memory. What kind of long-term memory do these pictures show? Episodic, semantic, or procedural? The answers are semantic. States, days of the week. Episodic, last birthday. Procedural, riding a bike and tying a shoe. Retaining information. All this makes you wonder, what's the best way to remember things? Especially if you have a big test coming up, it can be hard to know how to study. But research has shown us some of the best methods. First off, it's much better to study in spaced out sessions rather than cramming in the days or night before. You're practicing using your long-term memory. Next, active memory drills are much more effective than reading through the textbook or notes. Actually quizzing yourself or making yourself recall the information rather than just reading it works much better. This is because you are making your brain understand what the topic means instead of trying to recognize the correct answer. Other helpful methods are teaching someone else the material, connecting the material to other ideas you already know, doing practice problems, and using mnemonics. Sometimes this doesn't work. No matter how hard you try to remember something, this is what is known as retrieval failure. First impressions matter. Have you heard the phrase, "first impressions matter"? When given multiple pieces of information at one time, our brains tend to give special attention to the first item on a list because of rehearsal storing it in long-term memory. When we hear important information for the first time, we actively try to remember this and tend to tune out the information after. This is known as the primacy effect. And so do last impressions. Although first impressions do matter, last impressions matter just as much. Through our short-term memory, it's easier to remember the last item on a list. Because we had just heard these words, our short-term memory is able to store this. This idea is known as the recency effect.
A few of the structures that our brains use to store memories are the hippocampus, the amygdala, the cerebellum, and the basal ganglia. The hippocampus is a structure in the brain that allows for the transfer of short-term memory into long-term memory. Any memories that you have remembered for a long time have been processed by the hippocampus in order to become long-term memories. Another structure in the brain, known as the amygdala, is important in storing memory that is strongly related to emotions. The amygdala and hippocampus are structures located very close to each other in the brain, and they work together to form long-term memories connected with strong emotions. You might have noticed you tend to remember memories with stronger emotions longer. For example, I remember my first vacation at Disneyland, where I was excited to see Mickey Mouse in person, and the excitement of riding so many big roller coasters, much better than the first time I tried broccoli. Next, the cerebellum, which is a small structure toward the back of the brain, is important in retaining procedural memory that we talked about earlier. Do you remember what procedural memory is? This type of memory is important for remembering how to automatically do tasks, such as riding a bike or twisting a screw. And finally, the basal ganglia is a set of structures within the brain that allows for learning and motor control. This also helps with forming memories related to procedural memory and learning through practice. Damage to each of these areas can cause a severe impairment to the skills they are associated with. What do you think happens if each of these parts are damaged? Pause the video to think about your answers. If someone suffers from severe damage to the cerebellum, they might have trouble performing simple movements like walking straight or balancing. If someone has an issue with the basal ganglia, they will have difficulty learning and adapting to new concepts. If someone has issues with the amygdala, they might have issues processing memories that are heavily influenced by emotions. A memory where someone breaks their leg from tripping down a hill might not be connected with the pain of breaking their leg, so this person might do a similar dangerous thing later in life. And if someone has damage to the hippocampus, they might not be able to store memories long-term or make new memories. This is the reason why illnesses such as Alzheimer's are associated with memory loss, because of damage to the hippocampus. Apart from the structure-specific problems of memory in the brain, there are also other problems that can occur with either long-term or short-term memory. Amnesia is the inability to remember or recall certain events and can be caused by certain diseases, as well as heavy use of drugs. Amnesia is often classified into two categories, anterograde and retrograde. One famous example of anterograde amnesia is the character of Dory in the film Finding Nemo. If you've seen the movie, you know that Dory is unable to remember things that have just happened to her a few moments ago. This is because she suffers from anterograde amnesia. Anterograde amnesia affects our ability to turn short-term memories into long-term memories, meaning the ability to create new memories is lost. Retrograde amnesia is the opposite issue, where a person loses their previous memories but is still able to remember and store new experiences. People who suffer from retrograde amnesia might not remember who they are or forget large periods of time in their lives, such as their childhood. Imagine if you forgot everything about yourself, your name, your family, your life. Isn't that a scary thought? Sometimes, however, we have issues with remembering particular memories. Since the process of remembering memories is known as retrieval, problems in pulling long-term memory back to short-term memory is known as retrieval failure. This leads us to our next topic, the concept of forgetting. Although it's known that the process of forgetting has much to do with the decay or degradation of neurons that are associated with memory, there are a few competing theories as to why. One of these theories is the memory decay hypothesis. This states that if memories aren't retrieved or studied for a long period of time, then they begin to decay. A problem with this idea, however, is that sometimes we can retrieve memories without rehearsing them in the form of a flashbulb memory, which we will talk about later.
Another alternative theory is the interface theory, which suggests that the forgetting of old material has to do with the learning of new material. Trying to learn a new subject means storing information in your brain, which may crowd out older memories. This theory is supported by the recency effect that we talked about earlier. How well do you remember the exact design of the Apple logo? Could you produce it from memory without looking it up? Try it for yourself. Which direction is the leaf pointing? Is there a dip on the bottom of the apple? Conducted tests have shown that less than 1 out of 85 participants could accurately reproduce it. For an easier challenge, can you tell me which one of these images is correct? Less than 50% of the individuals were able to pick the right logo. Our brain is wired to remember the general details that might help us on our day-to-day lives. Even though a lot of us see the Apple logo on a daily basis, it's not necessary for us to remember the design, so we don't have a perfect recollection of it. One issue associated with memory is misinformation. This happens when we recall an event differently from the way it occurred. Our faulty memory is one reason why eyewitness testimonies of an accident are often faulty or misleading. We tend to forget the exact details of events, especially when a significant amount of time has passed. So sometimes our brains make up our own information to fill in the details. This changes how we remember an event. One other way our brains tend to deceive us when we are trying to remember something is through the words we use to describe an event. One study showed that when participants were asked about a car crash, the verb that was used by the scientists to describe the event to the participants changed the way the participants remembered how fast their car was going. If the word used was contacted or bumped, the participants were more likely to remember a less violent accident than if the word was smashed. When we think of cars being smashed, we think of a more violent event than if two cars bumped into each other. Our faulty memories can be reinforced or strengthened by the words that we use to describe them. This can lead to mistakes of memory. We've made it to the last topic, flashbulb memory. It's a term used to describe powerful or significant events that are easily recalled. These types of memories are often in high detail and are usually associated with strong negative emotions, although it is possible to have positive emotions associated with a flashbulb memory. We see these memories as moving pictures or episodes in our heads, almost as if we were reliving these memories. They pop up suddenly and can make us feel the same emotions we did in the event. Without memories, we wouldn't be able to be the people we are today. Our memories help us develop our personalities, learn from our mistakes, and develop new skills. The way our brains work may seem complicated, but it's also amazing that it can do all these different things. We hope you've learned a little bit more about your brain from us, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and wash your hands.